Hello, and welcome to my talk today on building MariaDB. My name is Daniel Bartholomew, but my last name is kind of long, so in the MariaDB world, I go by dbart pretty much everywhere. So if you see me on IRC or in Zulip chat, that's how you'll find me. My day job is as the MariaDB release manager, which basically means that I'm the person that shepherds a release in between the time when the developers are finished coding and when it shows up on mariadb.org or mariadb.com for download. I also have a website, if you're into that sort of thing, and I've written some books about MariaDB, though the two there on the left are really out of date now. But anyway, that's not why we're here. I wanted to talk today about how we build and test MariaDB. Central to any open source software project like MariaDB is the code, but end users, more often than not, prefer something they can install directly, like binary tarballs, RPMs, Debian packages, and so on. But why should we bother with all that? We meaning MariaDB. Many open source projects, when it's time for a release, simply take the snapshot of their code and pronounce it done. But while that may be just fine for some people, it's not fine for most end users. It also turns out that compiling and testing on a wide variety of operating systems and processor architectures is very valuable from a development standpoint. More on that later. So how do we do it? Well, central to our continuous integration infrastructure is a piece of software called BuildBot. Their website is located here, by the way. Anyway, the way that BuildBot works starts with a central main BuildBot node, and then there are many worker nodes. These worker nodes can be real or virtual. They can be on different processor architectures and so on. The main node pulls a source code repository, which in our case is a Git repository on GitHub, and it watches for commits in all the various trees and branches. When it sees one, it sends out jobs to the various worker nodes. At the same time, it keeps the developers up to date through a web interface and through other types of notifications. The basic build loop starts with BuildBot having a worker create a source tarball. This source tarball is then sent to all of the various worker nodes, and they compile whatever type of build they were set up to do. For example, Debian packages. But it could just as easily be a generic Linux binary, an RPM package, or even a Windows MSI package. These packages are then tested extensively. We run install tests, upgrade tests, feature tests, and so on. And the various tests will either pass or sometimes fail. But failures are okay because the developer who made the commit will see the failure and make a new push into the source tree, and the whole make a tarball, farm out jobs to the workers, build packages, and test, that whole loop will repeat. And hopefully this time, all the tests will pass. The primary BuildBot instance for MariaDB since about 2009 has been at buildbot.askmonty.org. This is what the build grid for a specific branch looks like. From here, you can click into any of the builds and take a look at the build properties, the tests that were run, and so even delve into the logs to find out exactly what was done and what happened during the build and tests. We're very close to replacing this older BuildBot instance with a new one that can be found at buildbot.mariadb.org. This instance has a different UI, but offers much the same functionality as the old instance. This is what the grid view looks like, and you can click into the build, check out build properties, and look at the test results and view the raw build and test logs. So that's BuildBot, but what operating systems do we actually build for? On the Linux side, we try to build on the most popular distributions, including Debian and Ubuntu, Red Hat, CentOS and Fedora, and SUSE and OpenSUSE. We also build on macOS and Windows. The specific package types we build include deb packages for Debian, Ubuntu, and all their variants, RPM packages for Red Hat, Red Hat, CentOS, Fedora, SUSE, and OpenSUSE, and then PKG and MSI packages for macOS and Windows, respectively. We also build on various processor architectures, including, of course, x86 and x86-64 from Intel and AMD, but also PowerPC from IBM, both big endian and little endian variants on both Power 8 and Power 9 processors, and we also build on ARM servers. We've found that everything else being equal, operating system, storage, RAM, etc., compiling and running tests on a variety of processor architectures can uncover hidden bugs. So we find doing this extremely useful. So how do we decide when to release? Well, for starters, we have a roadmap on our bug tracker at jira.mariadb.org. We do quarterly releases that include every bug fix we've made since the previous release, and as of right now, our next round of MariaDB server releases is scheduled for the end of January 2021. But we're not inflexible with this release schedule. We also have a security policy that basically states if we find something really bad, we'll do an immediate release, generally within a day or two. However, we don't support every version of MariaDB forever. We also have a maintenance policy for the various major versions of MariaDB, which states in general that from the time a major release series has its first stable or GA release, we will keep providing maintenance and security updates for at least 5 years for those operating systems that are not deprecated. I mention this because we also have a deprecation policy that governs when we will stop building MariaDB on a particular operating system. For example, on the previous slide it said that the 5-year cutoff date for MariaDB 10.2 is in May of 2022. However, Ubuntu 16.04 LTS Xenial will be deprecated in April of 2021. So even though we will still be providing updates to MariaDB 10.2 after April 2021, we won't be providing packages for Ubuntu Xenial. Of course, after April 2021, even Canonical, Ubuntu's parent company, won't be providing updates for Xenial. So by that time, you really should have already upgraded your Ubuntu machines past that point anyway. So that's all that I have for you today. Thank you very much, and I guess it's time for some questions.
So I have here with me today Daniel Bartholomew and Vlad Bogolin. So Daniel is our release manager, and Vlad is the main developer of our new BuildBot project. And I have a couple of questions for Daniel, and maybe Vlad can also help us out with some of the information.
Cool.
So I'm going to ask questions from a developer's standpoint, a application developer standpoint, or a DBA. So the first question that comes to mind is, how can I get the latest MariaDB releases?
Okay, so the latest MariaDB releases, there are 2 official locations. There's from mariadb.com. It's mariadb.com/downloads. But those are primarily focused on the x86-64 builds of MariaDB. So those are, and also those are the ones that if you have a support contract with MariaDB, those are the ones they're going to want you to use. So mariadb.com/downloads is where you can find those. But then the MariaDB Foundation also has a download site at downloads.mariadb.org, and there you can find x86-64 builds, but also ARM builds and PowerPC builds.
All right, that's good to know. Now, this is another question again related about packages. So if I get MariaDB packages from my own distribution, say I'm running Ubuntu and I just install MariaDB server. Are those packages the same as the ones that we get from the MariaDB BuildBot, or are they different?
No, they're different. Each distribution will have their own packaging person or team, and their own build infrastructure. For example, Otto Keklanian, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but Otto, he builds MariaDB for Debian and Ubuntu, and builds it on their infrastructure, on the Debian build farm. And then other distributions will be similar. They'll have a person or a packaging team, and they'll take the source code. They'll either take our official source tarball, or they'll grab it directly from our Git repository on GitHub, and they will take the source and build it themselves and package it in their packaging system.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, and I know Vlad did quite a bit of work with Docker images. Maybe you have a question about Docker for Daniel?
Are there any Docker officially supported Docker images, including MariaDB?
I know we have images on Docker Hub, but I'm not really involved in that effort, so I don't know much about that setup. I know they're there. There are some people at the foundation that are working on it, and your best bet is probably to ask at the MariaDB Zulip chat to ask about those. I know I just know they exist, basically.
Right. So we are. I think we're working on improving support for Docker images now. Now the other interesting question is, we have lots of packages for MariaDB. Now, how do they get distributed to end users?
Okay, so what we do is we upload them to a network of mirrors. These mirrors are scattered all around the world. They're hosted by companies, by universities, in some cases by individuals. If you go to downloads.mariadb.org, you can see the list of the mirrors, and the download system will try to guess a mirror that's close to you, but then they will also list the mirrors, and you can try to pick one that you know is closer if it guesses right. It usually guesses on a country level. And so it sometimes guesses, like if you're in Germany, it may guess Hamburg when you're closer to Berlin, so you can choose a closer mirror. But yeah, there's a couple hundred, I think. So there's a lot. And then the repositories are also mirrored. And so when you configure a repository, it will choose. It'll set you up with a specific mirror, and again, you can select a mirror that's closer to you.
Mm-hmm. Right, that's useful information. I know there's lots of mirrors, and so sometimes I know they can go offline, but I think most of them are reliable. So
yeah. The thing you have to keep in mind is that the MariaDB Foundation organizes the mirrors, but they don't control the mirrors. The mirrors are controlled by whichever entity is sponsoring the mirror. And sometimes they don't inform us, they don't inform anyone that they've stopped mirroring. They just stop. And so we rely on user reports to learn about it. We also have some monitoring in place, but we sometimes don't catch things. So you have to be aware that they're under the control of whichever entity is sponsoring it, whether it's a university or a company.
All right, that makes sense. So Vlad, did you have a question for Daniel?
Yes, I was wondering if Daniel said that the packages are so widespread distributed, how can the user make sure that the ones that he gets are genuine from MariaDB and do not pose any security issues?
So if you go to downloads.mariadb.org to download, we have checksums and GPG signatures that you can view there for things like our binary tarballs, our Windows packages, and things like that. And then also all our repositories are also signed. So if you're using apt in Debian or Ubuntu, or if you're using Yum or DNF in like Red Hat or Fedora, those repository the packaging tools, I mean repository tools, they will check those checksums and the signature files when they download and install. Like when you do a Yum install MariaDB, it will check the signature for you, and you can also verify it yourself. We have a page on the knowledge base. Let's see if I can remember. It's mariadb.com/kb/en/gpg. That GPG page lists the signatures that we use, the signature fingerprints, but then also on the downloads page, that's where you can find the checksums and the signatures for every file in the releases.
And who's this mysterious person signing all these packages?
Well, I sign all the packages. So if you see a signature, I signed it with my name. Well, not with my name.
So speaking of sign packages, you mentioned that BuildBot builds every push that gets made, which means that there's probably packages for every push that's made. Can I make use of these packages, let's say at my own risk?
You can. Our BuildBot has stores the files. I'm not exactly sure where you can access them. I know they're there. The main thing that we're interested in is the logs that we have, and so those are the things that are more publicly visible.
Yeah, here I can add some more information regarding the new BuildBot. So
okay, that's good.
for the new BuildBot, the same as Daniel said, the packages are stored and they can be downloaded from ci.mariadb.org. We are currently storing a small time frame of packages.
Yeah, we obviously can't store them forever. Usually it's a week or 2 weeks or something like that. I don't know what you have it set for currently.
It's something similar.
Yeah.
So now a question for both of you. How can I, as a community member, contribute to BuildBot in any way?
I'm probably going to defer this more to Vlad for this. The main there, people have donated hardware for the BuildBot effort. They've made code contributions. They've done things like that. A lot of our BuildBot efforts are coordinated on Zulip chat in the BuildBot stream. So if you want to help out, then that's where you can go to ask and talk about it.
Yeah, I agree that's a good starting point, and every contribution is more than welcomed. Regarding the new BuildBot, donating hardware, it's quite easy since it mainly uses remote Docker access, so minimal configuration on the worker machines are needed.
All right, so I assume that we will get, or we already have, a tutorial on how to set up a BuildBot slave for anyone that wants to donate.
Mm-hmm. It's a pretty easy process.
Yeah.
All right, so anyone watching would be very grateful for any donations you might have for us. And you're going to be using the same packages that those workers are building.
Yeah.
All right, that's all I had for Daniel and Vlad. Thank you very much. Thank you for answering all these questions, and let's head over to Kai for the next speaker.